Thank you. So I'll go ahead and get started. So I'm Greg Tatum. I work on Firefox for Mozilla. And to get started, the first question is, what is ECMAScript? So first off, there is the larger body that controls all this, which is ECMA International. And it is an organization that produces various standards. And ECMAScript is a scripting language specification standardized by ECMA International. And this language may not have good name recognition, but of course the best known implementation is JavaScript, which implements the ECMAScript standard since it was first published. And this is the programming language that a lot of the web is built on. So the first question is, who uses this language? Who uses ECMAScript? So almost all web applications end up using JavaScript. It is the scripting language for the web. If you open your browser and load some code, most likely it's written in JavaScript and running directly on the page. Mobile apps can use it as well, whether that's using PhoneGap, which is built using web technologies, or it's using something like React Native to build native apps using JavaScript. Servers can also run JavaScript, and so this is a completely different execution environment where you can write codes that aren't the code that isn't in the browser and building web services and various things like that. Even the Internet of Things is powered by JavaScript, and organizations such as startups and enterprise all use the language. It is ubiquitous in where you will find it. And students, the last one, there you go. So Stack Overflow does a survey to ask about technology use, and for the top 5 most commonly used languages, JavaScript is dominating this list, including other web technologies like HTML and CSS. So it is very prevalent. And one thing, if you haven't had experience writing the language, it is different from Java. They share a similar name because it sounded trendy at the time, but JavaScript is separate from Java. For the activity level on the web and in the industry overall, for GitHub pull requests, JavaScript is still widely used technology. And so with this talk, this language, JavaScript backed by ECMAScript, is prevalent across the web, across the technology that people use every single day. And so what's really important at the language level is to have extremely powerful internationalization tools that can be used for localization. And with that, having this ubiquitous language that is all over the place, having great tools, we raise the bar for being able to build, internationalize, and localize technology for the web and the world. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shane.
Thank you, Greg. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about now how we build internationalization into ECMAScript. So we build internationalization in ECMAScript with what we call the ECMA-402 task group, or TC39 task group 2. We are a body in ECMA International, and we have a meeting once a month, and we have proposals that go through the stage process to figure out how internationalization should look on the web. We provide a programmer tool set that conforms to Unicode CLDR standards, and we aim to promote best practices and eliminate the need to carry around your own internationalization library. So I want to explain a little bit here about how internationalization is going to work when you try to use it on the web in Chrome or in Firefox or in Safari or whatever your favorite browser happens to be. On the bottom of the stack always is Unicode. This is the Unicode conference. Unicode releases the standards and is the standards body that defines how internationalization works. On top of Unicode, we have CLDR, which is a database that collects data from hundreds of languages all around the world to conform to the Unicode standards. On top of CLDR sits ICU, which is a code base that implements the Unicode standards and uses CLDR data. and update this year is that there's IC4C, but also IC4X is also able to do much of what we need. If you attended the talk earlier, you saw a demo of IC4X running in Firefox. On top of IC4X is the browser engine. The browser engine uses the implementation that we have in ICU in order to expose this to JavaScript clients. On top of the browser engine, you have the ECMA-402 interface. If you attended the IC4X talk, you heard me talking about ECMA-402 a lot, and that's because we want ECMA-402 is an interface for how programs should interact with internationalization libraries, and ECMAScript is a big client for that, and our goal for IC4X to be able to implement that. But I'll focus on the topic of this talk, which is ECMAScript, and then on the very top is your application, which calls through ECMA-402 through the browser engine, through ICU using CLDR data, and then implements the Unicode standard. So this is how internationalization works when you call all these functions in JavaScript. So this is just an example of why this is important, and you can see how internationalization shows up on, this is a screenshot I took from YouTube. And internationalization's everywhere. There's lots of numbers, there's dates, and everything on this page. So, yep. So one question that we get a lot is, okay, so why should I use the internationalization that's built into the browser? Why shouldn't I just use like a JavaScript library? And there are really great JavaScript libraries that you can use for internationalization. So why should you use the one that's built into the browser? I'll give you three main reasons. One is reduced code size and dependencies. A lot of times when you your own JavaScript code to do this, it increases the size of your app. It makes it slower to load your app. So by using the built-in browser implementation, you can save on speed and make your application load faster. A second is you have consistent i18n across the platform. This is a little bit of a controversial point because there's sort of two ways to have consistent behavior. Using ECMA-402, you have consistent behavior across the platform, which means that all websites that use ECMA-402 have the same behavior that the user expects and is happy with. If you use a separate standalone library, you might have consistency across different browsers that access your site and different users, but then you lose consistency across the platform. So there's sort of these two areas of consistency. Some organizations prefer consistency of experience no matter what your device is, but I would argue that the better form of consistency is consistency across the platform for a particular user having consistency across all websites. So by using ECMA-402, you get to tap into that. The third is it makes it easy to do the right thing. Since JavaScript is the most widely used language, as we showed earlier, it's really important and for developers of all skill levels to be able to just do the right thing. It should be the correct thing should be the easy thing to do, and the wrong thing should be hard to do. So that's why it's really important to use the built-in libraries. So I think you're going to go over the laundry list of today's ECMA-402 features.
Thanks, Shane. So I'm just going to start going through different APIs. First off, in JavaScript, there is the Intl global. And on this global, it's an object that is full of different APIs that you can access. And here you can see I'm going to parse a locale, a Unicode locale. And taking this, here's a Polish locale that's just describing some hour cycle, and then in the JavaScript API using a calendar system. And with the resulting object you create, it parses everything and resolves the different preferences that have been set and gives you a locale that you can ask questions to and find out the answers, and it will turn it back into a complete locale string. And I think all these APIs I'm presenting right now are available currently in all major browsers. With that, you can also do number and currency formatting. So here's an English ENUS locale, and you're formatting a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it puts the comma in the right place. And you can access it through other APIs outside of the Intl object, like toLocale string, and you can conveniently specify the locale right there, and it'll present it fully localized. But there's also opportunities to do further customizations. So for instance, on Japan right here, you can specify a currency and specify the Japanese yen, and it will present the correct string for that. So here's different approaches to the APIs. The first here is more efficient for formatting many different numbers, and then the second one is like if you're going to do a quick format of a string, it's probably more convenient just to call toLocale string. So units and compact notation. If you're formatting these numbers, you can apply different types of strategies. For instance, here is a compact notation that you're going to display in a long way for 98.7 million. For another one, here's meter per second and percentage. And so as you're displaying numbers within your application, you can fully customize them for your needs and display. And my personal datetime formatting, which I've been working on a bunch lately. Here is the Mexican Spanish, and being able to format a date with the current date. And similarly to the previous example, kind of a convenient, just create a new date and turn it into a locale, one that is formatted for the locale. But of course, we provide additional customization features. So this is a whole bunch of options and specifying the length of the options and kind of how you want it to display. And whenever you format it, it gives you kind of more control over the date string that you present to the users. But often all you need is kind of to describe how much space you have to render to the screen. So with the datetime format here, you're saying I'm going to have a time style, and I need it to be pretty short for my screen. So when I'm formatting something, it ends up being something that doesn't take up a whole lot of characters to display. And you can combine time style and date style from maybe I want something that's medium and short, and it puts it all together for you. And of course, you can do different types of ranges, and using the same kind of formatter, you can create different dates and format a range of dates and display it to the end user so it's localized for them. And all of these are built into the browser, so you can easily load up a simple script and present localized information to users. Beyond that, there's relative time formatting, so how far away did something happen? What was the time difference between that? Here's showing something in quarters, a day ago, and you can switch here to Spanish and say like pasado mañana, and yeah. Another example is sorting text for users. It's different based off the locale. Different languages can sort things in different orders. And so here, if you're comparing German and Swedish with the A with the dots on top, those actually have different sorting rules in different languages. So you can sort things in a very consistent way for the user's locale and how they can expect to do things. And of course, presenting a more compact way of doing that, which may not be quite as, if you don't need to do it a whole bunch, you need to be less performant, but just quick. There's an easy way to do that. Now this one is, I will advise you all not to say plural rules 5 times fast, because I cannot do it. It is a tongue twister. But here with Russian, you can go through and given a number, you can select what that meaning of that number is for the quantities when you're displaying it. And list format, you can go through and say, oh, I'm going to take this list of things and provide as a conjunction in English. So motorcycle, bus, and car. Or if you want to do a disjunction in Spanish, so it's an or, it's like motocicleta, autobus, o coche. And then display names, like how do you describe this thing that you want to show to the user in that locale? What is the name of this thing? You can go through and to say in Chinese, if I need, whether they're country codes or different things, you can display that, or currency, you can provide a localized string to describe the thing that you're showing to the user. And next, I am happy that Shane is doing the live demo and not me. So here you go, Shane.
Thank you. I'm going to try to fit this mic back in the stand because I'm going to need both hands for this. Okay, luckily when we do a live demo of ECMAScript, all we need is a browser. So I'm just going to go ahead and I have a browser right here. I'm just going to open up the web inspector. The web inspector, is the web inspector enabled in this computer? Maybe the web inspector is not. Let's see. There's the inspector. Okay, cool. So there's a web inspector. I'll go ahead and open it in its own window and make it nice and big so y'all can see it. Okay, cool. Okay, so is this big enough for y'all to see? A little bit bigger? How's that? Is that good? Okay, sweet. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to check my navigator.useragent, see what I'm running on this computer. So this computer has running Chrome 93, so that's a fairly recent version of Chrome, not the newest version, but it's fairly recent. That should be able to do most of what we need to demo today. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to say I'm going to make a new formatter, and I'm going to make a relative time formatter. So to do this, I just go into the Intl object, and then inside the Intl object, here's all my things I can make. I'm going to go ahead and make a relative time formatter. I'll make it for Romanian, and then I can use it. So I can do fmt.format, and then the way this works is like this. And I've formatted a relative time in Romanian. So that's great. The other way I can do this, at least in area that's supported, is I can do the other way to do this, which is to-locale string. There's to-locale date string and time string. To-locale string, I think, is both date and time. And this will do it in the default locale. If I do it like this, then it gives it to me in the Romanian locale. So that's good. I can also show you what it looks like in some other locales, like there it is in Chinese. I can even set a specific calendar system, like this. And then, well, actually, in previous versions of Chrome, this actually did something a little bit more interesting, but it still, shows the date with some more Chinese characters here. I can also maybe show it in there we go. There's the date in the Hebrew calendar. Okay, I can also do format to parts. So let's go ahead and I'm actually going to do this example again. So instead of doing format, I can do format to parts, and then this allows me to break apart not only the literal but also the integers, and this would allow me to, for example, if I wanted to do different styling or something, I could do that here by doing format to parts. Then I could like make the 5 bold or something like that. Allow me to do this. I'll just quickly also demonstrate what happens here when I do I can also do this with numbering systems. So for example, I can do new date dot to locale string. I'll do two date locale string. Why not? And if I do this in Arabic, oh, that looks weird. That looks really weird.
It's correct. It's just not displaying right.
Yeah, it's not displaying correct because it's like right to left and stuff. So let me do this. Let me do this in. There we go. That looks a little bit better. In Bengali, and that uses the Bengali digits. If I wanted to use Latin digits instead, I could do it using the setter in the locale extensions. I can also do it using this format as well, using an option in the options bag. Okay, so that's just a quick tour of basically how you use Intl. And the best place to find out more about how you use Intl is to look at the MDN documentation. The Mozilla Developer Network has excellent documentation about all of this with many examples and everything. I'm just giving you a little flavor just so you can see what we're talking about. All of these APIs, all of these functions, they all go through. These are the things that our group works on, that we work on standardizing. So, yeah. And let me close this and go back to the presentation. Okay, I think, is this my section?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'll give the next few slides about features. So we have many features now supported in ECMA 402, but there's people who request more features. So we're actively adding tools. But all features go through a rigorous process to evaluate the needs for the feature as well as the APIs to implement it. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through a few examples of proposals that are nearing completion. You may be able to use some of these in right away. Some of them might not be widely available everywhere. So Intl Segmenter is one example. Intl Segmenter, you can already use it in both Chrome and Firefox. Chrome and Safari. The Firefox implementation is pending. And this is what Segmenter looks like. Segmenter allows you to do word breaks, as well as grapheme and sentence breaks of strings in a locale-sensitive way. This is what the Segmenter API looks like. The time zone name option is another one that's coming up. The base ECMAScript only supports the short and long forms of time zones. This proposal adds new forms and more new formats for displaying your time zone. It adds short and long, offset, and generic formats, which you can see here. The display names proposal adds the ability to get display names for more types of things, the calendars, daytime fields, and languages, among other things. This is what the display names proposal looks like. You can already use Intl display names for language and script and region, but this adds it for additional types of entities. Yeah, you can see a little bit of the example also down there of the language display, different formats that are useful, for example, for language selectors. Number format v3, this is the proposal I've been doing a lot of work on. This adds support for number ranges, not just single numbers like currencies and just single, but this adds for currency ranges. We already support date ranges. This adds currency ranges. This is what it looks like. We'd also do it with the plural rules, so you can use ranges both in the regular number format as well as plural rules. The Intl enumeration API lets you get lists of everything that the browser supports in a particular category, which again could be useful for selectors, for menus, as well as for data accessing and other things that the application might need. You can get the full list of everything that's available. Intl locale info. This is a proposal that's been in the works for a long time. Mozilla had a proprietary implementation of this, and now it's reaching the standardization process. So this lets you take a locale and get information about it, in particular for calendars and week displays and other information you might need in order to render your page for a particular locale. And temporal. Temporal is another thing that has been in the works for a long time. We did a lot of work to be able to support non-Gregorian calendars in temporal natively in the first version, which is a feature that we'll be able to. That I'm very proud that we're able to agree on for ECMAScript, because it's very important for internationalized dates and times. And you'll be able to do this soon. This is not an ECMA 402 proposal. This is a TC39 proposal, but we've been working very closely with them to make sure that we have our support for non-Gregorian calendars. This is an example of the API for creating a Hebrew date, and we also support conversion to and from the ISO calendar as well for dates. So I'm super excited that we'll be able to use this feature very soon. And active proposals. I think this is still my section, or is this your section?
I think I'm going switching over to this one.
Yeah, so with ECMA-402 is actively under development still, and so there's still APIs and proposals that are coming through. And in stage 2 is more of the design phase. Actually, no, I think maybe I'm doing the one after this. And there's one more after this one? Do this one. Okay, sure. And so like here you can see duration format, being able to format durations of time for a given locale. You can do era display. So going through and knowing what era is part of it. And so this is more of the stage 1 research phase of things. And during this time, we still have open questions about how things should work and getting what it should look like whenever it gets implemented. Our unit preferences. So here, looking at person height, and me presenting this, I don't know what. So expected output. Oh, I see here, 5 feet and 11 inches for that display. Is this polyfills for?
I think that's where I take over.
Okay.
Yep, and those last few proposals we saw, those are earlier stage proposals, which means that those are still very much flexible, and there's still a lot of open questions that we're answering. Something you'll hear me say several times today is that we're a committee, we're an open committee, and we want involvement from localization and internationalization professionals to help us make the web better for internationalization. So we're looking for feedback on those open proposals. For polyfills, one great way to use i18n, especially since not every feature is in every browser, is to use a polyfill. Format.js is one example of a polyfill library that's a close collaborator of ours works on. It's not the only polyfill, but it's certainly one that I'll plug only because the author attends our monthly meetings, so I'll give them a little bit of a VIP card and plug Format.js, but it's not the only polyfill. There's also other polyfills as well. So this is another question that I get a lot regarding ECMA-402. Okay, there's lots of features, but why don't you just expose all of IC4C? You've got all these other cool features in IC4C. Why don't you just expose them all through JavaScript? You can make FFIs and do everything. IC4C has a lot of features that are not necessary for the web, and the features that it does have are not necessarily designed in a way that encourages best practices for web users. So every single feature that we implement and add in ECMA-402 goes through a very long and rigorous process to look at at what is going to be the API that results in best practices for programmers and for users. So every ICU is very much a baseline for here's the area of the set of things we could implement, but then the things that we actually expose are a much smaller set that go through a much bigger vetting process. Which leads me to this next slide, which is a new slide this year, requirements for new proposals. Now that we are getting a more thorough set of a more thorough coverage, this question comes up a lot about, well, how do we discriminate between proposals we want to pursue and ones that are just sort of long tail? There's sort of 3 things we look at. One is that the proposal needs to have prior art. We don't invent localization i18n behavior. We only expose it to ECMAScript. So if there's a feature, for example, a feature that has been recently requested is phone numbers and address formatting. And that's not in Unicode or CLDR. There are other standards about that, but it's not at a point where we feel comfortable standardizing it in ECMAScript. Another example is message format. Message format 2.0 talk right before this one. There's not a prior art that we feel comfortable implementing right now. So we wait until that prior art is done in other bodies, and then once that's done, then we can expose it in ECMAScript. The second is it should be expensive to implement in user land, and this is simply because we want the ECMAScript APIs to be implementable. If there's certain i18n features that are basically very trivial to just do on your own, that's something that we don't consider in scope. So examples of things being expensive are very complicated algorithms that are hard to get right, as well as large data dependencies would make it expensive to implement. The third is, and this is the hardest thing to measure, but we try our best, is broad appeal, or critical for a multilingual web. An example for broad appeal is if you can demonstrate that a feature that you want to propose for ECMAScript is at least as useful as some other feature that's already in ECMAScript, then that's at least my personal line for like, okay, is it important enough to add? If it's at least as useful as, say, relative time formatting, then okay, sure, we should consider it. Critical for a multilingual web, is basically the bucket that will, contain other things that we consider important to implement, even if they don't have very broad appeal. They're still important to implement to have a very great international experience for all the users around the world. We also consider proposals to improve existing features. Error display, which one of the stage 1 proposals, is an example of that, where we're improving an existing feature in a fairly, tweaking it, and we will consider those proposals as long as, again, they're implementable and don't incur significant cost. So future directions, and I think this is where Greg takes over again.
Yeah, so the web's evolving and the user requirements are evolving. So the internationalization space and what the browsers can deliver should evolve with that. And so there's currently some different proposals that are kind of in the works. So one of those is message formatting. So if you're in this room earlier, you probably heard a few things about that. But whenever the message format working group releases a specification, we can bring that specification into ECMAScript so that localization features can be done directly in the browser. And the browser becomes even kind of more powerful for the fully internationalized web. With user preferences in operating systems of different platforms, you can specify the way that you want to look at something, like what day of the week is the first day of the week. Maybe that's different and you want to customize that. So a goal for this would be parity between web apps and native apps to be able to customize these user preferences. But some of these are listed as like future things because this can be tricky because this could potentially expose user preferences to the web in kind of a non-privacy conscious way. So these are areas that we have to explore solutions that will work for bringing kind of internationalization tools to ECMAScript. Data providers, I just sat in over on the Salesforce talk just before this, and they came up with custom solutions for the type of data that they need to provide for their users. So a goal for this would be to allow websites to provide their own locale data to support additional locales to override patterns. Because what happens is we can decide what seems to be appropriate in general for a locale, but different applications can have different requirements for different UX reasons. And so having the ability to provide that data and plug that in would be a useful feature. And of course, providing even more power and more tools to be able to describe languages, whether that's gender inflections and capitalization. You can ask for this, given this thing, is it el or la or o or u in Spanish? Do you capitalize the day name like Monday? These are additional tools that just will increase the quality of the localized content. And of course, working with Unicode, text processing is easy. It's fine. Let's don't have to think too hard about it, which is not true. So having access to things like Unicode properties to be able to ask questions about this text that you're looking at allows different types of features that can be built for the web and for all the different applications that ECMAScript uses. And so for ECMA-402 and for the group of people working to bring these to reality, to make all of JavaScript and all of its uses even more powerful, it takes people from Google and Chrome and Mozilla and all different kinds of organizations coming together to define what this is and build that. And so documentation, doing tech writing, being able to explain these concepts in a way that leads to their adoption. More internationalization and localization professionals to be able to participate in the standardization process. The more that you can bring your expertise to it and be able to weigh in on these APIs and the considerations and making sure we have high quality APIs, it opens it up for so many people to have access to high quality localization and internationalization tools. And doing things like actually implementing these things in browsers, that can be like a big intimidating thing, but there's also other tasks like writing tests for the spec and helping with the spec text to define what exactly that looks like for browsers to be able to implement. And again, like if I'm going to go implement something in Firefox, I'm going to be writing a bunch of C++. But even if you don't have the C++ skills, you can write polyfills in JavaScript and be able to contribute in different ways. That way, these APIs can be supported in many different places. And all of this is open. So I'm actually been joining these meetings. I'm a fairly new member joining in and discussing these things. And we're a welcoming group that likes to see new faces and new people participating. And so as me joining in to be able to do more of the work, having other professionals be able to come in and give you the things that you can bring to the table here is great. It's huge. We'd love to have you there. And to kind of join into the monthly teleconference, you can contact the ECMA-402-admin@chromium.org. And yeah, thank you so much. I think we'll move on to questions.
Naboisha.
Just a quick question about the part where you mentioned data loading for things that are missing currently. The way we do it in Chrome and I'm guessing in Firefox, that's going to be hard. Do we have kind of browser developer support for this effort?
Yeah, so the reason this is, I'll repeat the question. And Naboisha asked, okay, well, one of the future direction slides was dynamic data loading, but that's not currently implementable in browsers. How are we going to do this? The answer is this is one of the categories of feature requests that we get in ECMAScript. There's this core question of organizations that wants to provide their own overrides for certain pieces of data that they don't want to use from the system that they'd rather use on their own. And this is one of the biggest blockers for some organizations adopting ECMA-402. So it's a really high priority as a longer-term goal to be able to support this. The direction that I see us going to be able to do this starts with IC4X, starts with this idea of a CLDR as a service. Joel's talked this morning. It starts with this idea of having a standard interface for what locale data looks like, what form it takes. Once we have that interface, then we can start to use that interface as a basis for these ECMAScript APIs. So it's still a little bit of a ways out, but we're definitely making progress, in this direction, and I think it's a really important direction that we eventually end up in. So it's not something we might have next year. Maybe in a few more years we'll have more concrete updates in this area. This is not a super fast moving specification. Most of these proposals take 1 to 5 years to go to completion. So that's does that answer your question? Excellent. And thank you for the question. Another question from Bob.
I might have an app that has a lot of dates, a lot of numbers. So when I call the formatting, do we do something smart so I'm not constantly reloading the locale data that supports it? And also, do we have APIs? So here's 1,000 dates in one format. So I only reduce the call overhead to one. So I think about those sort of optimizations.
Yeah, so Bob asked, well, how do I optimize the case where I want to format a spreadsheet full of numbers or dates? How do I do that more efficiently? And this goes into the two forms of the API that you can call. You can either call the toLocale string form, where you basically rely on browser heuristics to be able to figure out how to optimize it for you, or if it's very performance critical. You can do the second form where you call new datetime format, new number format, and then you can call the format method, and that is a way for you to hint to the browser that you want this formatter to stay around for the lifetime of the function that you're using it in, for example. So if you're able to give the browser a little bit more information, this is the way that you can do it. But both ways will ultimately work. But you can help out a little bit and get the higher performance by creating a formatter and then using it multiple times in a loop. If you do use the singleton function, you're just relying on browser heuristics to be able to optimize it for you, which might end up working. But it's better to if you can give some hints, that'll always be the best. Another question? Oh, that's a great question. So the question was, we just did a presentation a little earlier about IC4X, where we said, okay, we want IC4X to be able to implement all of ECMA-402. If ECMA-402 is in the browser too, why would you need both? Like, why don't you just have the one in the browser or the one in IC4X? And the reason I see these two as coexisting, IC4X eventually becoming what could be a polyfill, if you will, for ECMA-402 for environments that don't support it, or for adding new locales and adding new features that are maybe not available in the browsers. I see these two as very much going hand in hand, where if you're able to use the implementation through the browser, that's definitely the first thing you should do, absolutely. And if you need to do a fallback, you can then look at IC4X in WebAssembly as basically a fallback, as a polyfill. And if IC4X is also the backing implementation in the browser, then that makes it such that the polyfill is basically has identical behavior. It's the same code, which is even cooler, because you can't do that right now with IC4C, because you can't ship IC4C in an efficient way in the JavaScript and WebAssembly. Did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and one thing about building out the ECMA-402 APIs is that there's certain restrictions on in considerations and trade-offs when you're designing an API for the open web to be able to consume and use. And so being aligned on the ICU4X and being aligned on the ECMA-402 implementations, on the ICU4X side, you could have some additional features, like if you need all of the time zone location information, could be heavyweight and might not be shipped in the ECMA-402 API, but you could then go back to ICU4X and be able to get that and get it into the browser easily. So they could end up working pretty well together.
Yeah, so the model that I think we're trying to get to is IC4X can basically be your polyfill, similar to format.js would be today, where you would need the WebAssembly only in the fallback case, and you can use the browser native implementation when it's available and when it has the features that you need. So it's not like the architecture would not necessarily be that WebAssembly is calling into the browser APIs, although I guess in principle it could, but I would see WebAssembly not necessarily being a core piece necessarily. Yeah, so these APIs are top level objects, are global objects in ECMAScript. So they're available in all of the ECMAScript contexts. Across different realms and web workers, etc. Yeah, these APIs, you don't have to load them separately. They're also available in in most other ECMAScript implementations, including Node.js as well. I think web workers are able to handle that because they're within a certain scope. If you're within a web worker, then you should be safe using all the ECMAScript APIs. Oh, yep.
This may be a non-codable project, but what would you think of situations where you'd want to have the same API but base it on different ICU data? So let's say, for example, Java, you can restart it with a certain configuration that will say, okay, use legacy data as opposed to modern data. And this is in a case where you're looking to get formatting that's, say, compatible with a specific operating system, but you want to be able to make sure that you can actually support that formatting if you can provide those, that information.
Yeah. So, this is kind of, goes into what I was discussing a little earlier, actually, about the locale data APIs, because, one of the biggest discussions that we have with a lot of especially large organizations that are trying to adopt ECMAScript APIs into their products is that they say, well, we want to have more consistent behavior. We don't want, across different browsers, as opposed to what ECMAScript gives you, which is consistency for a particular user across different websites. And those two types of consistencies are, sort of conflicting with each other. And right now, ECMAScript only supports the one form, which is consistency across the platform. But if you're an organization and you want consistency across your product across all browsers and all users, then this is definitely an important case, and that's why we've been talking about the being able to provide overlays on your locale data. And it's not available right now, but I do hope for this to be available at some point, through the staging process as it becomes implementable. Just a couple minutes left, maybe time for one more question. Does anyone have one more question? There we go. Oh yeah, so so if I'll flip back a few slides here. So these proposals here are ones that are currently in progress, and these are hopefully at next year's conference. These will be available shipping in early in some browsers. The second section here are future directions that we want to go. These are probably a little bit more than a year down the road. The message formatting, the user preferences, the locale data provider, the gender inflections and capitalization, it's Unicode properties. So yeah, in terms of timelines. And you also said the word parsing. I was wondering if anyone was going to say that word. Parsing is a very it's a complex area with no clear specification. And we said that one of the requirements for APIs to be considered in ECMA-402 is for there to be a very clear, prior art and specification that we can implement. That doesn't and probably will never exist for parsing. Parsing is a very complex problem. It could, you can either do a heuristic type, rule-based, or you can even do machine learning in order to do your parsing. So it's a very complex area, and that's not something that we consider in scope for ECMA-402. This is another feature that I'd say that the two biggest questions I get are, when can you have locale data overrides, and when can I have parsing? Locale data overrides is, I definitely do see on the long-term roadmap. Parsing, it's best if you can avoid parsing. The way to avoid it is to use HTML input elements because HTML input elements allow the user to specify, their dates and their numbers in a very, clear user interface way. The best way to implement parsing is to just avoid it entirely, because most of the time when you have parsing, it's in order to take user inputs. There are other, legitimate use cases for parsing, and I would say that the way to do those is to basically build a parsing engine that's very specific to that specific use case you have. And we have more discussion about this topic in the specification. You can read. We have a whole paragraph about why parsing is out of scope for ECMA 402. And I see Addison just stood up, which I think means we're out of time. So, did you want the microphone back?
Thank you both for an excellent presentation. Please, everyone, remember to fill in the evaluation forms for the speakers. People appreciate that. The review committee appreciates that a lot. So thank you for a great presentation.